To make one. Douglas Murray is Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society and writes for The Spectator. Good morning to you, Douglas.
Morning. Good to be with you.
Good morning. Nice to have you with us. What do you make of what you've just heard? And what do you make of the fact that apparently lots of Muslims would like an Islamic state, not necessarily in the UK, but they would like a pure, proper Islamic state somewhere in the world, and those that want to live under that could then go and live in that particular part of the world?
Well, firstly, can I respond to some things that have been said? First of all, in your interview with Dilly Hussain, Dilly said that the event in Bedford was to clarify and assist people's understanding of Islam. It was really no such thing. And any Muslim, apart from anything else, knows that. If you look at the lineup of speakers was so totally unrepresentative of British Islam that it's laughable to pretend that it was there to assist. It was a propaganda event. It involved many of the most prominent fundamentalists in the UK. It promoted an exceptionally narrow version of Islam, an exceptionally fundamentalist version of Islam. It was clearly not to either clarify or assist. And when Dilly Hussain says that he can't speak on behalf of 1.3 billion Muslims, he's absolutely right. The problem is that people like him so often pretend that they do. As for Roshan's point, he says himself he's not an Islamic scholar and then goes on to say that he doesn't respect the opinions of anyone who isn't an Islamic scholar. So we can absolutely disregard his own opinions by his own terms as being not worth listening to. But just to add some things that are not opinion, but are just what we used to call facts. The situation is that everywhere that Islamic law, Sharia law, is instituted and has been instituted, women are regarded as second-class citizens by law. All people who are not Muslims are regarded as second-class citizens by law. Apostasy is punishable by death, and homosexuality is also punishable by death. And this isn't just a historical matter. This is what happens in all states in the world today where Islamic law is introduced. So I think you ask the perfectly pertinent and very important question. Because when people in the UK who are either Muslim or non-Muslim find out that radicals and fundamentalists are gathering to promote an exceptionally narrow and fundamentalist version of Islam, they are right to be concerned. And I would say on behalf of most Muslims in Britain and the vast majority of non-Muslims, that if people do not like British law and would prefer Islamic law, they are welcome to go to the countries in the world that are practicing that law. They may not practice it as perfectly as some of the fundamentalists would like, but it's much nearer than Britain. So they can go to the paradise of the Islamic State and see how equal rights work there, and rights for gays and rights for women. And if they think that's a bit too hardcore, they're welcome to go to Saudi Arabia and try their luck. But we have to realize what these people are and realize how anti-British they are. They are against most British non-Muslims and they are against most British Muslims.
The fact then that we are told many Muslims in Britain would rather like to live under that law, that should be a concern, should it?
Of course. Of course it's a concern. It's a concern whenever there's any group of people, however large or small, who think that the laws of the land are laws they would like to fundamentally change. But I think that it's true these people are a minority within a minority in Britain. Most Muslims around the world in Britain rather, came to Britain from around the world in the last 60 years because they were actually escaping the countries which are trying to practice the kind of Islamic law we've heard about today. They came to Britain to escape those horrific, barbaric, backwards laws. And it is one of the strangest paradoxes of our time that in many cases, people who are the children or grandchildren of people who came to the UK precisely to escape that system of law now spend their time trying to institute the system of law their parents and grandparents understandably fled from.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I mean, there are always crazy people in the world. There are always fundamentalists. There are always totalitarians. There are always extremists. I'm sorry that we have this particular problem at the moment. It's not the first type of extremism we've had to deal with in the UK. But I think, as I say, that as a nation, we can be very confident of the fact that most British people do not want to murder gays. Most British people do not regard women as chattel and second-class citizens. And by the way, let me just correct your non-Islamic scholar's comment on that. It is true that Muhammad instituted some laws for women which were fairly progressive for 7th century Arabia. They are certainly not progressive in 21st century Europe, not at all. So most people in Europe and most people in Britain don't want to kill the gays. They don't want to regard women as second-class citizens. They don't want to regard people from other ethnic and religious minorities as second-class citizens. They don't want people who are born into a Muslim family but choose to leave the religion to be killed. They don't want any of this. We like our law. We like British law. We like the law of liberal democracies. We're going to keep it. And we will just have to keep an eye on these crazy people, the Five Pillars nutters, the Dili Husseins, the fundamentalists, the people who in Bedford the other night formed a kind of Islamist fundamentalist version of Celebrity Strictly Come Dancing. We will keep our eye on them, and we know that they won't win.
Douglas, let me, because it's only fair, having just made particularly that last comment, let me bring Roshan Mohammed Salih back in, who's the editor of the Five Pillars website.
Yeah.
I guess you'd like to respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, before I've got loads of points to make, but I would like to ask Douglas Murray a question. Could he please recite Surat al-Fatiha in Arabic, which is any Muslim child with a basic knowledge of Islam will be able to recite that surah fluently. Could he do it now, please, live on air?
You just said, Roshan, you just said you didn't care for the views of anyone else. So
you can't do it,
don't need to listen to me, and I don't need to listen to you. You said by your own standards, Roshan, that you don't listen to the scholars or anyone else. So why would you listen to it? Of course you will not. Of course you will not.
He can't recite Surah Al-Fatiha.
You're going to do a deflection tactic because you've already tried it throughout your interview.
You're an expert at that, aren't you?
You've been trying throughout your interview to pretend that what is in the Quran and what is in the Hadith, which anyone can read there or in any history books, is not there. You're not a scholar, you are a fundamentalist.
I don't want to speak to you. Can I speak to the presenter, please? All right. What that
To be fair, you did just involve Douglas. I was going to have a separate conversation with the two of them, but with the two of you, but you did just ask him a question.
All right. Douglas Murray refused to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, which any Muslim child with no knowledge of Islam can recite. That means that he is unable to do that. That means he is completely ignorant about Islam, and therefore he should not be allowed on any TV program or any radio show.
Was I the one who didn't know what was in your Quran?
He has no right.
Was I the one who didn't know what your prophet said?
Now,
was I the one who didn't even know what your prophet said and did? No,
Mr. Murray.
That was you.
I didn't interrupt you, Mr. Murray. Can I just say?
It was you who didn't know what your own prophet said. It was you who didn't know what your own prophet said.
You're just ignorant about Islam. You can't recite Surah Al-Fatiha. That's shameful.
You said yourself you're not a scholar. You don't know anything. There's no reason why we need to listen to you.
There's
no reason why we need to listen to you. You said so yourself.
I've just embarrassed you in public. You're just lashing out now. Let me make my points, and then
very briefly, because we're coming up to the news. So make it in 20 seconds, if you would.
Yeah, basically, look, the meeting was misrepresented. No one called for an Islamic State. Dili Hussein and the panelists are not representative of British Islam. Of course they're not. But they were there to answer questions. There were non-Muslims there. They had the opportunity to ask questions. I think they did. Douglas Murray should not be allowed on TV or radio because he really knows nothing about Islam, as I just proved.
Okay, well, thankfully we live in a free country where we have freedom of speech and we can speak to different people with different opposing views. Thank you very much indeed. Roshan Mohammed Salih, who's the editor of the Five Pillars website. Thank you as well to Douglas Murray, who is welcome on this programme, who's the Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society and writes for The Spectator, to make one. Douglas Murray is Associate Director of the Henry Jackson Society and writes for The Spectator. Good morning to you, Douglas.
Morning. Good to be with you.
Good morning. Nice to have you with us. What do you make of what you've just heard? And what do you make of the fact that apparently lots of Muslims would like an Islamic State, not necessarily in the UK, but they would like a pure, proper Islamic State somewhere in the world, and those that want to live under that could then go and live in that particular part of the world?
Well, firstly, can I respond to some things that have been said? First of all, in your interview with Dili Hussein, Dili said that the event in Bedford was to clarify and assist people's understanding of Islam. It was really no such thing. And any Muslim, apart from anything else, knows that. If you look at the lineup of speakers was so totally unrepresentative of British Islam that it's laughable to pretend that it was there to assist. It was a propaganda event. It involved many of the most prominent fundamentalists in the UK. It promoted an exceptionally narrow version of Islam, an exceptionally fundamentalist version of Islam. It was clearly not to either clarify or assist. And when Dili Hussein says that he can't speak on behalf of 1.3 billion Muslims, he's absolutely right. The problem is that people like him so often pretend that they do. As for Roshan's point, he says himself he's not an Islamic scholar and then goes